Ian, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here again.
Again, I know. So, audience, let's clarify a bit for you. This is actually kind of a companion episode to Ian's podcast. So, if you're unfamiliar with Ian's podcasts, I'll put a link to the specific episode, but he celebrated episode 100. You could almost consider this a two-parter. One part's over at Ian's show, one part's over on my show. Make sure to tune in there. And then 8 years ago, Ian appeared. I can't believe it's been 8 years. 8 years ago, Ian appeared on episode 132 of Working Class Audio. That link will be in the show notes. So you'll have a couple chances to kind of get the backstory on Ian. For now, for this episode, we're gonna dig into some modern stuff and get into it. But anyhow, that was a long-winded bunch of stuff that I just said there. Welcome to the show again. It's good to see you again. I just saw you yesterday.
Thank you. It's great to be back, including from yesterday.
Tell me, since 2017, when we did that first episode, what has changed in mastering from your perspective, from a stylistic or technological point of view? Where are we at today compared to where we were 8 years ago?
It's a tough one to answer. I mean, in some ways, not much. I mean, you say stylistically, we have some different genres that have kind of come up into the mainstream and at the top of the charts. There's other stuff that is not so prevalent now. But in terms of the kind of the results you're aiming for when you're mastering, it's kind of the same as it was. I mean, a huge amount has changed technologically. I'm sure we'll get into this, but, we now have AI with air quotes mastering and, stem separation tools and things like transient designers have just really leapt up. There's all kinds of incredibly sophisticated tech that's available now in digital form that wasn't then, stuff that I would have kind of dreamed of. But now we have it. I'm not so sure I want to use it. Maybe we could talk about that as well. And I think that means there's more is possible in mastering. And there's some kind of important questions to ask about whether that should be possible. And I mean that it's a bad thing that it's possible, but it's like, just because we can do it at the mastering stage doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing to do, I would say. I think the other thing that springs to my mind is really, I'm not going to say the death of the album, because people are still recording and releasing albums, but that thing that we knew was going to happen then, which was that people were going to want single songs mastered more and more often, than that people would release albums kind of track by track and then bring them all together. That's happened in a big way. So, there are far fewer projects that come to me as albums from the get-go, and I have far more clients who want to do individual songs, which that's great, but I mean it's also a challenge because for me a lot of mastering is about context. So yeah, I kind of get everything and nothing.
From my perspective, I think that the migration towards a single type mentality when it comes to mastering or a series of singles, part of that I think has to do with the economics of it, because bands, artists they're either doing things in their bedroom or their practice studios, or, they're recording on their own, and they're recording in small batches. They're not necessarily, sitting down and booking out a studio for 2 months and creating a full length album. It's also marketing. Instead of doing one big release and one big push, they're doing a bunch of tiny little pushes throughout the year. New single here, and then 2 months later, hey, we have another new single.
The other kind of end of the spectrum almost is this thing that has been new to me in the last few years, which is that suddenly you'll get a big name artist just drop an entire album just like that. I don't know about you, but my kind of concept of the album release schedule is almost, kind of people start talking about recording the new album, then we are recording the new album, then we're finishing up, we're mixing it, we're having it mastered, it's coming soon, here, teaser stuff, here's a single, here's another single, and then there's the album. I forget who it was. There was definitely one artist talking about this online and just saying that approach doesn't work anymore because attention spans are so short. I guess social media is another thing. It's not kind of strictly related to mastering necessarily, but it's definitely something that it was there when last time we spoke 8 years ago. I think it's how we met, but it was a completely different animal. It was different platforms, different ways of consuming content. And I think that has changed. The risk if you do what I just said, which is these little kind of drip teasers, and then you drop a single and another single, is that things could get completely lost. On the other hand, just thinking about an example that's kind of near to my heart, the last Peter Gabriel album, I believe that was basically complete. And then he released one song a month for an entire year and actually started to tour it before everybody had heard all of the songs. And then the album came out. Again, it's everything and nothing. There's a lot more variety, I guess, is another way to, kind of sum it up. The whole concept of what mastering is almost kind of like splitting into, different kind of strands and different tendrils. And there's different people, there are people mastering on the mix bus. There are people going to a mastering engineer like me. There are people using AI. It's changed a lot.
It has changed a lot. And it's funny because, we've said it a couple times, the external factors, marketing for music has been there for quite some time. When we're talking about commercial music, it's ever present, but social media has played a strong role in determining what happens to, I think, a lot of artists. And anyways, I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of social media talk and try to keep it in the audio realm. Yeah, things have changed. Do you feel, is it your sense that more people are mastering in the box now than they were 8 years ago versus hardware?
I mean, yes, but I think that's in large part because more people are mastering things. I mean, when 30 years ago, when I started my career, hardly anybody knew what mastering was. So one of the first things you would do when you had a mastering session with clients was kind of, okay, so this is what happens. This is how it works. Here's the process. Here's what we can do. Here's what we can't do. That's not necessary. Everybody now knows what mastering is. But even when we originally spoke, I think, because, as well as being a mastering engineer, I've made some plugins, I've made some courses to help people master their own stuff, as you know. That was something that felt very new 15 years ago when I kind of set up my first website and started my own blog and all that kind of stuff, the early days of the YouTube channel. Again, I felt like in some ways the whole concept of mastering was being introduced to people. And, I was trying to help people do a good job of it if they wanted to do it themselves, because lots of people do. And now I feel like actually maybe that's more the norm, that people do it themselves, or at least attempt to. And there's so many mixing studios that also offer mastering services. And I think the vast majority of them probably aren't investing in dedicated mastering hardware. That is just my sense. I don't kind of have any hard numbers for that. But I feel like because now the plugins have developed to such a level of sophistication where there are even things you can do in plugins that you simply can't do in hardware. And because they're so much more affordable and because of the practicalities of it that we talked about yesterday, I think, lots more people mastering in the box, but probably not as a kind of a philosophical choice of like, I want to do this because of good reasons, or I don't want to do that because of other reasons. Just more of a kind of, well, this is how it's going to work. I think the people who enjoy doing hardware mastering, particularly analog mastering, are probably still doing that. Although, again, as we mentioned yesterday, I suspect for practical reasons, a lot of people with huge rooms full of beautiful gear don't use it nearly as much as they used to. Again, I know there are some people who absolutely do, and that's part of they feel that's part of their identity and their personality as a mastering engineer. I think that's absolutely valid. So that's a very long answer to a question. I think probably more people are mastering in the box, yes.
In some respects, if you look at multi-track recording, the cost used to be prohibitive. 24-track machines used to be, just crazy expensive. You had to have a really nice console, whether it be a Neve or an SSL or an API or whatever. And then, Pro Tools kind of came along and started to whittle away at that model over time. And then other DAWs came, and the democratization of recording really took the turn that it did. And I wonder if mastering is going through a similar thing where the tools, Wavelab, very powerful, very popular tool for a lot of mastering engineers. You use it. Justin Perkins uses it. Jessica Thompson uses it. So I feel that mastering is in the middle of it right now. The walls are coming down. The cost, the barrier for entry is been greatly lowered.
I was going to say, we talked yesterday about, back in the day when you needed something like £500,000 worth of gear just to make a CD master, even if all you recorded onto it was off of an analog cassette. It had something ridiculous like that. Whereas these days, all you need is a laptop, and an internet connection. That cost of entry. But I mean, as well, I'm a huge fan of TC Electronic hardware. I used their System 6000 mastering console for 15 years, the company that I used to be at. When that closed and I started up on my own, I experimented with all kinds of other stuff. I discovered FabFilter and kind of other, and then that processing is now available in plugin form for £350 or something. So it's much more accessible in that sense as well. And I think awareness has grown of mastering as a topic and as a discipline, and what the goals of mastering are. I think, understanding has grown. So yeah, I mean, I actually think for me personally, I think we're at the end of it. I feel like it's happened now. Yeah, we're in that kind of post-democratization phase that you mentioned there.
I look at, for example, the laptop that I'm talking to you on right now. Years ago, you dump a bunch of money into your Pro Tools rig, and the computers were a factor. They were part of it, and they were expensive, but their power was limited. So Pro Tools users typically would rely on the cards. But nowadays, like, I think I've dumped more money into this laptop than any single computer in the past. Now, obviously, there's inflation to account for, and all the economic realities of that. But, this laptop that I'm talking to you on, it's like, an M2, I maxed it out as far as I could go and spent, just under $5,000 on it. However, I use it every day for everything. It is the hub of everything. So that shift is, I think, pretty monumental in the world of recording technology and where we're at.
The computer you're talking about will comfortably handle Dolby Atmos mixing, right? Where you've got probably hundreds of tracks contributing to the mix. So in terms of mastering, where usually you're only working on stereo files. Even if you're working on stem masters, you probably only got 8 stereo pairs. So even if you throw a huge amount of processing at it and you're working at 2496 or whatever it might be, the laptop's not going to break a sweat.
Not at all. No, it's been great. Suffice it to say, things have changed. The presence of AI is definitely something that is growing day by day. Quite honestly, I think a lot of people used to shudder at the idea of online automated mastering. Now it's like totally normal for a lot of people. And, in some respects, if you're working on an insane amount of stuff that has to be turned over rapidly, to me, that totally makes sense. But for the more handcrafted kind of, bespoke records that we work on, personally, I'm not a fan of the concept. I like to deal with people, but, that's a old guy yelling at clouds conversation. But I wanted to ask you, in terms of today, we talked about how, the barrier for entry is much lower. How are you feeling about like what you charge to master? What do you see out there that people are charging? Do you feel that the cost that we have invested in equipment matches up with what we're charging? Because in the days of hardware only and attended mastering sessions, it was, God, I mean, anywhere from 100 to 150 an hour. Like it was like lawyer kind of money at the time.
Yeah, but yesterday we talked about the hardware versus software kind of conversation. And I think we both agreed that it was all about the results, not the tools. I loved your analogy of, you don't ask the chef what kind of make of griddle he used. If you use a griddle for making steak, I'm not a chef. But if it tastes great, it tastes great. So for me, it's not about the investment in gear so much as it is the investment in time, right? I think what people are paying me for, or any human being when they come to us for mastering, is experience and taste and being a human. I completely agree with what you said there, in the sense that the thing that I have no problem with AI in any capacity, really. I have concerns about how the data is obtained for the AI, just like everybody else. My wife is an author, so the idea of books being scraped and other books being generated, that's like people's music being scraped and other music being generated and passed off as a pale imitation. That I think needs a lot of investigation. But in terms of using AI to get better results, to save time, all of that stuff, I think it's fantastic. And I use it myself for kind of the business stuff, the admin stuff, brainstorming, research, all this kind of thing. I think in that sense, it's just like, to me, a really sophisticated search engine. But the things that it absolutely can't do are bespoke and handcrafted. And it also can't do the other thing that I said I thought was really important about mastering, which is context. If I take a little bit of a tangent, my own experience of using AI, just ChatGPT with written word, is that typically I will write something and I'll throw it and say into the thing and say, do you have any suggestions or kind of improvements or things that I've missed out, and see what it says. And if it comes back with suggestions that I like, then I'll incorporate them into the text. The interesting thing is every so often you'll ask it a question, it'll say, hey, would you like me to write that for you? And out of curiosity more than anything else, I've said, yeah, sure. And what comes back is usually fine, but it's always bland and generic. And I actually went down a bit of a rabbit hole of finding out how GPTs work, because I've got a technical head. There's a maths channel that did some amazing videos on the literally how a GPT is built, which is fascinating. But the thing that comes out of it very clearly is that it's basically doing trends. It's not a person giving you an opinion. It's a thing telling you the most likely outcome of whatever you give it. So it understands, okay, if I have cheese and bread and ham, I'm probably making a sandwich. But it's unlikely to tell you a new and fantastically delicious recipe for a sandwich. And the same thing applies to audio. All of these AI tools, even the ones that I'm not talking necessarily about auto mastering, but you think about, some of these things where you can get an analysis of, okay, how does your track fit in comparison to all the other R&B tracks out there, or, EDM tracks out there, or folk tracks out there, whatever that might be. That's kind of interesting to know, but what it's telling you is how close am I to the average? And for me, when you're talking about bespoke and handcrafted and art and creativity, how close do we want to be to the average? Do we want to be average at all? I don't think we do. I think people want to be exceptional. And that's what AI can't do. It takes all of the sharp edges and all the interesting bits off and kind of makes things more generic and more bland. So yeah, if you've got volume stuff that you just need to be in the right ballpark for a music library or sound effects or some such, then that's a really helpful tool to have. But if you've got a piece of art that you've sweated blood and tears over for 3 years and you want it to be the best thing it can possibly be, which is what I see the role of mastering as, I would never trust a machine to do that bit of the job for me, because they don't understand emotion, they don't understand context. I'm actually about to record a video for my YouTube channel about AI with a real example of, so I had a client who sent me the files and said, okay, so I had an AI master of these done. It's kind of okay, but I'm sure you can do better. Tell me what you think. Spoiler, what was interesting was when I listened to individual songs, I kind of thought, yeah, they're okay. I mean, they're not what I would do, and I think they could be better, but they're okay. Where it all fell to pieces when you compared one song with another one. And you had what was supposed to be a gentle ballad and what was supposed to be a real rocking, full-on arrangement. And the ballad ended up being louder because the machine was just going, okay, it needs to be this. And I tested 3 or 4 different AIs in the end, because I ended up going into a college and doing a talk for the students there based on this kind of research. And none of the AIs got close to getting the context right, how the songs should interrelate. And I always say this, how is a machine going to understand that this soft, gentle song is meant to be sweet and heartwarming, and this one is meant to be bitter and twisted, and ironic? Or how is it supposed to know that this loud, thumping thing is supposed to be aggressive and angry, and this one is supposed to be happy and cheerful? It's not there yet. I don't know whether it ever will be. And anyway, that's what people are good at. So that's what I think a person can bring to the mastering situation. And I just don't see the machines doing that. Having said that, I think in terms of kind of bouncing ideas off, if you're somebody who wants to master their own material and you're listening to this mix and you're thinking, is this good? Sending it to a bunch of AIs and getting them back and kind of thinking, oh, well, they've all added a bit of low end and they've all kind of tamed those high frequencies, so maybe I should do something similar to that. Using it as a kicking off point, I think is a great strategy. And I like the approach that Isotope take with Ozone, with the mastering assistant, where it's not like a black box where you put something in and it puts something out and you either like it or you don't. You put something in and it shows you what the processes that it's applied are, and you can decide which of them you like and which of them you don't, and you can have more of one or less of the other, or turn some of them off. I mean, for me, I usually disable almost always all of it, but it's still interesting to kind of see what the machine quotes thinks.
Right. Right.
So yeah, I think AI is incredibly impressive. I think it's fun. I think it can be interesting to bounce ideas off of, but I personally would never trust something that I genuinely cared about to it.
When you bring a person to any kind of creative pursuit and have them contribute, they are going to apply their filter, and they're going to be able to interpret what the artist wants. And I'll give you a very clear-cut example that AI, I don't think would ever be able to handle. Well, I say that and then watch this won't age well. In 5 or 10 years from now, it'll be brilliant. And I'll eat my words. But for now, so Lidge Shaw, who's a mutual friend of ours, he's produced this artist. It's a guy named Chris Chamness, and he's had me mix it. Recently, we're working on this song, and the discussion, like we've all kind of said, well, there's obviously a Beatles-esque element going on here. Let's not try to run from it. Let's just embrace it. And it came to the discussion of the drums. And the initial mix that I had, because we tossed around different things, we were talking about, talking about different drum treatments. And the first generation of the mix, I had this slap back on the drums, sent it to Chris, and he said, less imagine, more let it be on the drums. I was like, I know exactly what he's saying. Take the slap back off, push the drums up, and make them, more present and up front. And if you said that to an AI, I don't know at this stage of the game, well, especially in mixing, if that would be even possible. Now, maybe with, song creation through Studio or some of these other things, possibly.
Absolutely. And that reminds me of something similar just from one of my favorite sessions ever. I was recording a bunch of jazz musicians, and it was kind of take 3 or take 4, and the feel just wasn't there. And I didn't know much about jazz when I started my career, and since then I've worked on a ton of it and really come to appreciate it. And I think at that stage I was slightly skeptical of it all seemed a bit clever and a bit intellectual and all the rest of it. And one of the guys there, the guitarist, just said suddenly out of nowhere, said, needs to be more like Stevie Wonder, isn't she lovely? And they all went, oh, right, okay. And then they did the perfect take. That was a great example to me of actually how broad a lot of jazz musicians are, and the kind of shared dialogue and understanding of how music works. Somebody else who I can't remember the name of said ages ago that music is communication format, right? It's one person communicating something, emotion or a concept or a mood or whatever it is, to another person. And that's the weird thing with AI. It seems like there's another person on the other end, but there isn't. There's nobody there. There's just a bunch of prediction algorithms and lots of data. And the other thing that kind of popped into my head when you were talking there, which kind of relates to a conversation we were having, not on a podcast, just for once, fairly recently, was there's this weird thing with AI where you say, give me this, and it gives you something, kind of like, yeah, that's close. Okay, can I try this? And it gives you something else, and you're like, yeah, that's better. How about this? 2 or 3 times, if you get there, it's all good. But there comes a point where it just basically loses whatever it was you had in the first place, because the machine has no concept of what was good or bad. It's just kind of going, what's this? Where is it most likely to go based on everything that I've seen before? And I think that whole, because, when you made that arrangement, that change to that mix, you will have kept everything else that was good about it, right? You'll just have moved the drum sound in the direction that the client wanted. Mm-hmm. Whereas I bet if you got an AI to do that, it would also have added more cowbell and added too much reverb, but done other stuff that you didn't want, And I mean, as I say that, I can think there are kind of clients like that where I say, this mix is great. Can we just have a little bit less bass? And they do that, but they also push the BVs up by 4 dBs. And I'm like, we didn't need to do that.
It fails to build on previous successes. It's like, yes, that's the perfect color green, or yes, that's the perfect, tone of guitar. Now let's add this. And then it just falls apart over time. Maybe we'll see that change. Who knows? I want to talk a little bit about your geographic location. And we talked about this on your show, but just refresh everybody's memory. Where are you located?
I'm in the UK, as you can probably tell. About an hour north from London is Cambridge, and I'm about 20 minutes north of Cambridge. So yeah, I'm in a kind of a pretty traditional British village, I guess. I'm looking out now over the cricket pitch. There's a traditional old pub just down the road from me. I can walk out into the fields and down to the river that way. It's a beautiful place to live, but you have to drive a fair way to get to most of the useful stuff.
Right. Do you feel that your geographic location is challenging to your audio career?
That's really interesting. I would say yes. I was going to say much less now. I mean, the reason it's challenging, I remember when I started my career in audio, I met my wife when we were young. We met college, not at the university, but at college in Cambridge. then we were abroad when I got the reply to my letter that got me my first job interview and ultimately my first job, which just happened to be here. And I think I mentioned when we last spoke that I had sent letters out to a bunch of places where we thought we might like to live. I didn't send any to anywhere in London, even though London is the center of the UK music, or it's definitely a center. You know, there are other cities around the country that are also have really vibrant music scenes, but traditionally, especially in terms of the industry, London has been the hub. And I knew at the time that was probably going to mean that I wouldn't work with a ton of major artists, right? Because almost all of those, the record companies are based in London. There are plenty of studios in London to service those clients. And I was very comfortable with that because I just didn't want to live in London. And I mean, I've been to London a lot through my life and I always enjoy it. It's fun, it's exciting, but pretty much every time I go, I think to myself, I'm just really glad I don't actually live here. And, that's just a personal thing. There's a bunch of other people who feel exact opposite. They kind of come here and they say, yes, lovely, but it's not London. So, that's a personal taste thing. So I knew that was going to be a factor. And I was lucky that I found sound recording technology, SRT, this kind of was a thriving independent mastering facility just outside Cambridge, where I worked for 15 years. And then when it was time for me to move on, I set up myself, and sadly SRT closed, not related. And I've been able to kind of keep things going since then. So it's a disadvantage in the sense that I am an hour outside London. So if I want to go to, well, I went to Christmas drinks at Abbey Road last year. That means it takes me, by the time I've kind of driven to the station, waited for the train, got the train, been on the tube, it's an hour and a half to 2 hours to get there. And that means I have to leave on time. Otherwise, I'll miss the last train and I won't get home. So that's a kind of practical limitation. There's a cost aspect involved. So if I was in London, I'd be able to network much more easily with a bunch of people than I do here. I think that is a challenge. I think, face-to-face is important in our industry and I want to do more of it. So there's that aspect. The files for a mastering session can be done in minutes in terms of sending from anywhere in the world. So now, I mean, as many of my clients are abroad as they are in the UK, and it's got to the point where people don't want to do attended sessions, even if I was set up to provide them. That's a good thing in terms of me getting the work. It's a shame because I enjoyed attended sessions. It was nice to work directly with people and to have that one-to-one contact and, to be able to have, what do you think of this? And okay, how about this? And how about, all of that. Having said that, these days we have audio movers and other software that enables us to stream CD quality audio in real time. So, and you can have a Zoom call running at the same time, or there are dedicated plugins that, put all of that in one place. So those kind of limitations, I think, have been effectively removed. But I think that the social aspect of it and just the practicality of, people kind of finding you easily accessible. I think there's a perception of that when people are geographically close, that just feels different. I don't know whether you think that, but I imagine you being able to go out and physically visit a bunch of studios, really quite easily based on your location. That's got to be an advantage, right?
Yeah, there are many layers to this onion. I'll say that. 8 years ago, we hadn't gone through COVID yet. Technology was good, but it's even better now. What the choices we have. In terms of networking, I've spent a considerable amount of my life networking via the podcast. Initially it was Skype, and that gave way to Zoom. And so I spend every week at least an hour plus talking to one or two people in interview situations. And I'll give you an example of how that is materialized in some ways. So you introduced Imre Ramazanoglu to me as a guest because you said, I think you guys will hit it off. And we did. We did the interview. It's a great interview. Now, every morning, I check my Signal chats because Imre is usually getting in touch going, hey, give me a call. I want to talk to you about this Atmos thing because we have a lot of Atmos back and forth. And between, Signal and WhatsApp, it's like I get up in the morning and I communicate with my European friends. And then as the day kind of progresses, it's like my US friends and then, local friends. But I complement all of that online activity by going to events whenever possible. NAMM, AES, here, our Bay Area Audio Nerds group that we hang out with. Any opportunity to interact with a human. That's why I'm asking, do you feel that, being where you're at you're at a disadvantage, but I mean, gosh, you're close to one of the biggest music markets and hubs of the planet. It's a hub, and you're within 1 to 2 hours of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really fair point. In fact, as I was always kind of saying, oh, it takes me an hour and a half or 2 hours to get there. I mean, it can take people in London an hour to an hour and a half to get across London. It's like, that's probably, I mean, we've talked before. I want to do more of that real world stuff. I want to get out and see more people. I mean, I'm like you. I also I've exploited the opportunities that social media and having a podcast and all the rest of it gives us, and I want to keep doing that. But I also want to do more in the real world. And my career is going okay. I don't know that I would necessarily say that I've suffered that much from my geographical location. I mean, one thing I would say, last time we spoke, I remember saying to you, yeah, my day is kind of doing the school run with the kids. Then we work for a few hours. Then I probably quite often will go and meet them and bring them back. And I'll do a bit more work. Maybe I'll do some work in the evening. I don't do the school run these days because my kids are now teenagers and about to go off to college. In fact, one of them's at university. But being in this location, I do have to give my younger son a lift to the bus so that he can get the bus into Cambridge to go to the college. And then, again, so I spend about, I don't know, an hour of a day being a taxi service. And a couple of nights ago, well, in fact, the night before we spoke for my show, I said to you that I was feeling a bit kind of spaced out because I had given my elder son a lift to the airport at 2 a.m. so that he could go to Spain for his holiday. All of those things, it's not so much being outside London, it's just not being in a town with a railway, which, is hard to do in the UK these days. I know it is hard in the US as well. There are far less railway stations and rail lines than there used to be. But it's kind of interesting that, things change, but they're the same. And you think things are going to get easier or more straightforward, and that's not necessarily always the case.
But something that, you're hinting at there is 8 years ago, our children were 8 years younger. Now, I've got one in college. I've got one who is a year from going to college. The point of me of even bringing any of this up is that we're both coming to a position in our lives where we've had this, 30 plus years of experience. Our children are now growing and they're adults or they're close to adults. There's going to come a point where we have an empty nest here. And I'm curious how, I've already kind of started to speculate like how that's going to alter my day-to-day audio life and what opportunities are coming. I have a client who I've had for 20 plus years. He's moving to upstate New York. We've agreed, well, what if we just met over at Electrical Audio in Chicago and worked on records there? I can be gone for a couple weeks. It's totally fine. So for you, what does that look like?
That's really interesting. I think I haven't started thinking about the opportunities yet. Maybe that's because both of my sons are interested in careers in the creative industries. So I'm not necessarily anticipating they're going to fly the nest anytime soon. But in fact, my wife and I have come at it from a different angle because we're both self-employed. She's a children's author. So we both work from home. And I talked back in the 8 years ago when I was on your show about how cool that is because, neither of us get lonely. We get to have a coffee break or, we can help each other with talk things over, solve challenges, kind of touch base, all that kind of stuff, which is great. But I'm almost thinking we're going to have to be really careful with this extra time that we have not to fill it with work, right? Because I don't know about you, but for us, it's like I love the freedom and the flexibility of being self-employed, but also you don't have the security of a regular salary. So even when things are good, you're always looking, or you should be looking at what might happen next and what might go wrong and how you might fill this gap and, what opportunities are out there. What should you be looking at next? What technology do I have to pay attention to? What trends? All of these kind of things. And I think, for me, my concern, the thing that I've thought about so far is just we must remember to make time for ourselves, and have a life. Because the bits of our time that have been free to have life in for the last 18 plus years have been mostly, dedicated to the kids. We do have time to ourselves, but the majority of it is, if there's time to spend with the kids, then we want to spend it with them while they're here. So yeah, when that becomes less the case, my goal is to somehow find a way to keep the work under check, not let it just expand to fill all of that available extra space. You're absolutely right. There's going to be it's going to give me more flexibility and more time in the day when I'm not doing that kind of taxi service and that kind of stuff. So I want to capitalize on that for sure. Right now I'm thinking, okay, so what do I want to do now with, what are my goals outside of work and all the rest of it?
Yeah. And I mean, I recognize you don't want to completely fill every single hour of your day, because let's face it, for both of us, we've eaten more breakfasts than we have left on this planet. So
don't make me sad. That might not be true. I don't know exactly how old you are, but I could live to be 100. That would be fine.
Well, I'm 55.
I think I'm right on the cusp.
I'm 55 and I'm planning on living to 105 minimum. Who knows? But I look at the remaining time that I've got, assuming nothing seriously goes wrong. We'll see how that ages. And I really want to work. I want to work more. You mentioned it yesterday in our talk on your show. You talked about, just digging into, a master, and you being essentially, I'm paraphrasing, you said you were in your happy place. Like it just brought you joy. And I, concurred that, yeah, that happens for me too. Nothing brings a smile to my face like sitting down for a mix or setting up for a tracking session. I want to make more of that. Now, that said, I also want to travel the world with my wife.
Yeah, exactly. I think, it's interesting because, when people talk about working class audio, the kind of the phrase work-life balance comes to mind. And I remember a long time ago reading a book, I think it was called The One Thing, that one of the key ideas in that was there's no such thing as work-life balance. These things are never in balance. What you have to do is just kind of accept that at certain points, this is going to take priority. And then at other points, this is going to take priority, and just make sure it's not one thing all the time to the detriment of the others, which I guess is a kind of a bigger picture version of balance. But yeah, I agree. I guess I'm just aware that, for me, the requirement that at a certain point of the day, I know I'm going to have to go and pick somebody up from the bus station or whatever it is, that kind of gives you a clear end to the working day. So you don't kind of go, I'll just answer one more block of emails, or I'll just, this other thing. Maybe you're better at this than me. Maybe you're more disciplined. It's very easy for me to get tempted into just, well, okay, there's 20 minutes free. I'll try and get those things out of the way and just, letting the work kind of balloon. I agree with you. So I guess maybe what we're saying is we want to be intentional about doing work that lights us up, making sure that we're going to maximize the time spent doing the stuff that is for me, working with clients, working on music, working directly with people, developing the plugins, researching new, interesting, cool ways of doing stuff and new ideas. That's the stuff that I really enjoy and want to do more of. I want to do more of that and less replying to emails.
Your listeners, my listeners, the greater audio community. I mean, I think not all of us, but many of us, a large majority of us, do this because we love to do some form of audio. It brings us pleasure. We enjoy it immensely. I don't think it's not like, well, it's a job and I do it. It's like, it's just not like that. And I'm very grateful that many of us are in that position. Because you know what? I see my neighbor who worked for a big company all his life, and then he retired, and he's fucking bored. I see him out there. He's working in the yard all the time just to pass the time. He's like, well, I guess I'm going to go and go to do this. And I think I'm going to go watch 2 movies today. I mean, now he just seems genuinely bored. I know he's enjoying his boredom, but he's sincerely, I think every day I talk to him, I'm just like, God, you need to get another job.
I mean, I completely agree with you in that sense. It's, if I don't play the lottery, so I'm never going to win it. But if I did and I won, I would still work. I would still do stuff.
100%.
And it would be audio. It would be music because that's the thing that I love. We talked yesterday about my kind of weird fascination with having the first time I ever heard stereo, and then, found out that Trevor Horn was a producer and had an influence on the sound of records, and was intrigued by the concept that Prince did everything himself, except he didn't. But all of that stuff, that obsession, it's been there since I was an early teen. In fact, I listened to Hitchhiker's Guide when I was 10, so it's been with me since I was 10. It's not going to go away, right? It's not going to. I mean, I got a binaural pair of mics for my birthday a few years ago. So you wear them in your ears, and it uses your head as the binaural baffle. So, and I just record stuff out and about just for the hell of it. There's absolutely no use to me of it. I just enjoy doing it. And so, yeah, in that sense, I completely agree with you.
We're going to be old men with our little binaural headset mics out there. I have them now. I have the DPA binaural mics that occasionally I'll pop out with and go record wacky shit that nobody's going to hear. One other thing that we touched on a little bit, and I want to touch on it a little bit in this show, we talked a little bit about the whole perception of, and not the plugin, but the perception of who we are. I've kind of talked about it a bit, the podcaster versus the engineer. Some people have referred to you as the loudness guy versus the mastering engineer. And in your show, I think we both have kind of, said, well, it is what it is. And, it comes with the territory. If you put yourself out there and do that, people are going to associate you with that. It's, if you're a very public drug user, people are going to assume you're a drug addict.
Are you accusing me of being a dynamics addict?
You brought it onto yourself, Ian.
No, I think that's completely fair. What was the question?
Since we talked about it yesterday, you've had some time to think about it a little more. Do you have any more to say about how you're perceived? And I mean, I know loudness is a fascination of yours, and obviously your help in designing some of the meter plugs plugins is an important part of your life, but it's not entirely all who you are. So have you thought any more about that since we talked yesterday?
I agree with you that we have to accept that if you go public with an opinion about something, and it's even remotely controversial, then people are going to pay attention to that, and that there are going to be pros and cons to that. The pros are, most of the mastering I get, people know that I love dynamics and want more balanced dynamics in their masters rather than wanting stuff super loud, which is not work that I particularly enjoy doing. The cons are, I think people think I'm more of an extremist than I am. I would prefer to be the dynamics guy rather than the loudness guy, because that makes the assumption then is, he's anti-loudness, which I'm not. I love loud music. I make loud masters. It's just when it gets beyond a certain point that I start to feel like it's no longer beneficial. I definitely think I have this analogy that I made an infographic of years ago of this thing called the loudness hill, where, it's getting your music to be loud is hard. It's like pushing a boulder uphill. It takes effort, it takes skill. You get up to a certain point, but there's a definite benefit, right? You want to be at a similar height to the other mountains around you so that you can be seen and see. So you're pushing your boulder up the hill, and then it starts to level off, and the benefits from pushing that boulder up the hill get less. And if you go too far, the boulder falls over the other side and gets smashed to pieces on the rocks below, which is what I think happens when you go beyond a certain point with the loudness of music. So, I mean, it's kind of a silly analogy, but it's not like I'm anti-loudness. I'm not anti-compression. Compression is absolutely a fundamental component of a modern pop rock sound, any kind of popular genre at this point. I use limiting, I use clipping, I do all this stuff. And I do not advocate mastering at -14 LUFS, even though I spend a lot of time talking about this number because it happens to be what the streaming services are doing. I don't master at -14. I don't suggest anybody else masters at -14 or any other number, right? Mm-hmm. It's all about the music. It's all about what's right. I have some rules of thumb that I follow that people who listen to my show will know all about, or I've talked about it in my YouTube videos, so I'm not going to bother going into all of that now. And I have to take some blame for it, right? Or I have to take the responsibility for it. I don't think my messaging about loudness in the early days, similar to the time that I was last on your show, I don't think that was really great, right? I remember saying stuff like loudness is stupid, loudness is pointless, the loudness war is insanity, all those kind of things. And I think those were, they caught attention. They kind of, their extreme statements, they got me some clicks probably, which that's not why I said them. I was just kind of trying to express myself honestly. But with hindsight, I'm not happy with all of that because I think people felt criticized, right? I think the implication was, oh, loudness is stupid, therefore anybody who goes for loudness is stupid. And that's not what I was saying. I absolutely appreciate the immense pressure that most mastering engineers in particular, but now mix engineers as well. There's another thing that's changed, going back to the beginning of our conversation, is that mixes come in already super, super loud, which can be a real challenge in the mastering situation. But so yeah, there's this huge pressure from all points in the industry, or it seems like there is this huge pressure that things need to be super loud. I think that's an illusion, because the vast majority of people are listening on streaming platforms these days, so the loudest stuff gets turned down, so they never hear actually how loud it is. And I think, actually creative people like us are much more caught up with this concept than music fans. I don't think they care at all, and there's academic evidence to show that they don't care. But so that's another issue.
I have a good analogy for you.
Okay.
With regards to loudness, I think what you're saying is it's okay to fry your food, just don't burn it. Get it crispy and golden brown, but if you take it too far, it's going to be charred.
And a pinch of salt helps almost everything taste better. It's a flavor enhancer. But if you put too much in, all you can taste is the salt. Yeah, absolutely. For a non-foodie, we're using a lot of food analogies on this show, but that's fine. It's so kind of rewinding to what I was saying. I think it's, I with hindsight, I wish that messaging had been different. Because as I say, I unintentionally gave the impression that I was being critical of people who want to make their stuff loud or enjoy making stuff loud or are required to make stuff loud. And that was never my intention. I was trying to present evidence that that's not necessary, and that actually there's a ton of freedom for all of us these days, especially with loudness normalization, to just do what you think works best for the music. And if that is incredibly dense and, compressed and limited, well then great. But also it's fine to not do that. And since almost everything that I hear these days is at the louder end of that, I'd like more balance. I think it'd be great to hear more stuff that kind of comes from the different perspective. And that's where I try and aim my stuff. So these days I try and present these issues in a kind of a more understanding way, and to kind of show that I appreciate that there are a ton of reasons, some good, some bad, in my opinion, why people make things loud. And yeah, just try and instead say, look, let's experiment with some of this other stuff. There's only a few things that are under our control in music. There's loudness and dynamics, there's stereo width, there's frequency content, and there's timbre, there's arrangement. But so that's like 5 things. There's probably a couple of others that I haven't thought of. But for me as a creative person, why would I creative limitations are great, but I feel like we're almost in the situation at the moment where it's like, well, you can have the other 4, but you can't have loudness. You got to cut your thumb off to begin with. And it's like opposable thumbs are what made humans what we are. I think my metaphor has gone completely off the rails at this point, but you get what I'm saying. It's so yeah, I think.
Are you using drugs, Ian?
It's just too many coffees. That's all it is.
Well, look, back then, 8 years ago, it's what you knew and it's where you were at with it. And, quite honestly, if you look back 8 years ago at Working Class Audio, you mentioned the work-life balance thing. I hardly talk about work-life balance these days. It's not something that really comes up as often. I still talk about people's families and, but, here I am now at this age talking about, I want to work more because the kids are going to be gone. So, it's a different message because we're at different spots in our life and we have different experiences and bring different wisdom to the table, at this point. So, well, Ian, great to have you back once again, audience. I'm going to provide links, the past episode with Ian, episode 132, a link to Ian's show, Ian's podcast, so you can hear episode 100 and hear us talk about, he lets me take over his show if I didn't mention that in the beginning. And I interview him on his show. So it's a little more like traditional Working Class Audio kind of origin story kind of business. So listen to that if you haven't heard it, because it's a companion to this episode. I can't remember who thought of that, but I think that was a really, really fun idea to do that. So I appreciate your time, and I appreciate, you coming on and laying it all out here.
Well, thank you, Matt. Thanks for asking me back on your show, and thanks for interviewing me twice and being a guest on my show. I wanted to help make my audience aware of Working Class Audio if they weren't already, because I think it's such a fantastic podcast. I think a ton of people already listen to it, but anybody who doesn't really should. And I'm saying this on the wrong show now because all of your listeners are listening to us here. But that was why it was great to have you on my show. And I hope, I agree. I think it was a joint kind of idea between us. I think it was fun too. Hopefully everybody listening thinks it's fun and not incredibly boring.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
They all just came for the analogies, really.
Oh, crazy analogies. That's my thing.
Yeah. Well, fantastic, Ian. Will you take care? And I'll probably talk to you in about another, I don't know. I'll see you this Friday when I see you next.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matt.
Okay. Take care.